A medic runs through machine gun fire on Omaha Beach. He's wounded. Shrapnel cuts deep into his legs, but he doesn't retreat. He moves toward the dying. German soldiers watch from their bunkers, frozen. This is the story of American medics who carried no weapons but shattered enemy morale by refusing to let death win. June 6, 1944, dawn, Omaha Beach. Waverly B. Woodson Jr. felt the shrapnel before he heard the explosion. Metal fragments tore through his left leg and hip, burning like acid poured into open wounds. His hands hit the sand. Blood soaked through his medic's uniform, the white armband with the red cross suddenly looking like a target rather than protection. Around him, men screamed. Bodies floated in the surf. The tide brought them in like cargo nobody wanted. He should have stayed down. Every instinct bred into him through basic training. Every survival mechanism hardened during the crossing from England. Every rational thought screaming in his skull told him, find cover, treat yourself, wait for the chaos to pass. Instead, Woodson pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His leg buckled. He gripped his medical bag, 30 pounds of bandages, morphine, plasma, sulfa powder, and began walking toward the men drowning in 3 feet of water. A German MG-42 machine gunner in WZ-62, one of the concrete bunkers overlooking the beach, watched through his sight. His finger rested on the trigger. He'd been firing for 40 minutes. He'd stopped counting bodies at 70. But this made no sense. The black medic with the Red Cross armband was moving parallel to the waterline, stopping at each fallen American, not retreating, not attacking, healing. The German didn't fire. He couldn't explain why. Later, he wouldn't even try. Woodson reached Private First Class James Thompson first. Thompson had taken rounds through both lungs. Pink foam bubbled from his mouth with each failed breath. His eyes found Woodson's face, wide with terror, narrowing with recognition, then closing with something that looked like peace. Woodson's hands moved automatically. Pressure bandage, morphine syringe, 1/4 grain. He marked Thompson's forehead with the empty tube. Plasma. The IV needle slid into the vein on the first try, despite Woodson's hands shaking from blood loss. He propped Thompson's head above the water using a dead man's pack. Thompson would live. He'd survive to see his daughter born in 1946, but Woodson didn't know that. He only knew the next man dying 20 feet away. And the next. And the next. If this Mission Impossible made your breath catch, hit like. More untold stories coming. The 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion had landed in the second wave. Their job was to deploy hydrogen-filled balloons that would stop German dive bombers. But half their equipment sank. The other half burned. So the battalion's medics, Woodson among them, became something else entirely. They became the reason men lived long enough to remember D-Day. Sergeant Woodson worked for 30 hours without stopping. Not for food, not for water. Not to treat his own wounds, which kept bleeding through the bandages he finally wrapped around his leg at hour 12. He set up a triage station 15 feet from the high tide line. Bodies came to him in waves. Some walked, some crawled. Most were carried by other wounded men who refused to leave their brothers behind. He saved approximately 200 men that day. The Army's official count lists 187. Other accounts suggest more. Nobody kept perfect records while bullets carved the air. But the Germans kept watching. In WZ-62, the machine gunner, his name was Klaus Dietrich, though Woodson would never know it, lit a cigarette with shaking hands. His loader, a teenager from Bavaria named Hans, hadn't fired for an hour, their gun pointed at the beach. Their orders were clear: kill anything that moved. But the medic kept moving, and they kept not firing. Warum? Hans whispered. Why? Dietrich had no answer. He'd killed men that morning. He'd killed boys. He'd killed Americans storming his position with rifles and grenades and hate in their eyes. That made sense. That was war. But this medic, wounded, unarmed, healing the dying while death surrounded him, this violated something deeper than orders. This was something Dietrich had no words for. So he watched, and didn't fire, and felt something crack inside himself that wouldn't heal. By noon, Woodson had run out of morphine. He used whiskey from a dead officer's flask. By 1400 hours, he ran out of plasma. He used saline and prayer. By 1800 hours, he ran out of bandages. He tore up uniforms from corpses. The men kept coming. He kept working. 4 times, German artillery found the range of his aid station. Shells exploded close enough to bury him in sand. Each time, he dug himself out and returned to the wounded. His hands never stopped moving. Bandage, tourniquet, pressure, morphine when he found more, words of comfort when he found strength. "You're going home, soldier. Stay with me." That's an order. Most believed him. Some didn't. He saved them anyway. One moment broke something in the German observers. Hour 23. A Marine, his name was Robert Chen, Chinese-American from San Francisco, crawled to Woodson Station with his intestines held in place by his own hands. Chen was crying, not from pain. From fear he'd die before seeing his son. Woodson looked at the wounds. Statistically unsurvivable, medically hopeless. But Woodson didn't work on statistics. He cleaned the wounds, pushed the intestines back inside, stitched the cavity closed with fishing line from his emergency kit, gave Chen his own canteen of water, held his hand while the morphine took effect. Chen lived. He saw his son, named him Waverly. The Germans in WZ-62 watched through binoculars. Hans threw up. Dietrich closed his eyes. Neither man fired another shot for the rest of the invasion. They were captured 2 days later. When Army interrogators asked why they'd abandoned their post, Dietrich said something that made no sense in German or English. "We couldn't fight angels." But Omaha Beach was just the beginning of something that terrified the enemy more than bullets ever could. 2 years later, February 28, 1945, Iwo Jima. Pharmacist's mate, 3rd class John Harlan Willis pressed his thumb against the Marine's radial artery. The pulse was there, weak, thready, barely enough to sustain consciousness. The Marine, corporal no name given, just another dying boy far from Kentucky or Kansas or wherever boys came from before becoming corpses, had taken shrapnel through his femoral artery. Blood pumped out with each heartbeat, bright red, arterial, fatal in 3 minutes without intervention. Willis already had the plasma going. Type O. Universal donor. The bottle hung from a rifle stuck bayonet first into volcanic ash. The IV line ran clear. But plasma alone wouldn't save him if Willis couldn't stop the bleeding. He worked by feel. His fingers found the torn artery inside the wound, pinched it closed, applied pressure. His other hand reached for the clamps in his medical kit. That's when the grenade landed in the foxhole. Willis saw it. Small, round, Type 97 Japanese fragmentation grenade. 4-second fuse. It rolled between his knees and the Marine's head. His training was automatic. Grab. Throw. His right hand released the artery, grabbed the grenade, threw it 20 feet. It exploded in midair. Shrapnel whistled past his helmet. He clamped the artery, tied it off, resumed the plasma drip. The second grenade landed 30 seconds later. He threw it. Then the third, then the fourth. Here's what nobody understood. Not the Japanese soldiers watching from their caves, not the Marines who survived to tell the story, not the Navy chaplain who wrote the after-action report. Willis never stopped treating his patient. Right hand threw grenades. Left hand held pressure. He talked the whole time. Calm. Steady. "Stay with me, Marine. You're going home. Almost done. 1 more second. Stay with me." 9 grenades total. He threw back 8. The 9th exploded in his hand. His right arm disintegrated from the elbow down. Bone fragments mixed with steel fragments. His body absorbed the blast meant for the Marine beneath him. He fell forward. Blood from his arm mixed with blood from the Marine's leg. His left hand, still functional, reached for the plasma line, checked it, adjusted the flow rate, pressed his shoulder stump against his own wound to slow the bleeding, finished the injection. Then he died. The Marine lived. He was 20 years old. He went home to Tennessee, had 3 daughters, lived to be 79, never forgot the medic who threw grenades with one hand and saved his life with the other. But the Japanese soldiers in the caves, they couldn't process what they'd witnessed. One of them, Corporal Takeshi Yamamoto, survived the battle. American interrogators interviewed him in March 1945. His testimony, translated poorly but preserved in the National Archives, reads, "We threw grenades to kill the American medic. We wanted to kill him because he kept saving Marines. We needed the Marines to die, but he did not die. He caught our grenades and threw them back like catching baseballs. While doing this, he gave medicine to wounded Marine. This is not possible. This is not human. How do you fight men who heal while they die?" Yamamoto stopped fighting after Willis died. He walked out of his cave with his hands raised. He surrendered to the Americans not because he feared death, but because he could no longer understand the war he was fighting. Subscribe so you don't miss the next impossible story the history books forgot. 30 miles south of Willis's foxhole, same day, different nightmare. Pharmacists mate second class Jack Williams, no relation to John Willis, connected only by surname and profession and impossible courage, dragged his third wounded Marine toward the aid station when the machine gun burst caught him. 3 rounds, 1 through his right shoulder, 1 through his lower abdomen, 1 through his left thigh. He fell. His cargo, a 19-year-old private from Oklahoma with half his face blown off, fell beside him. Williams pressed his hand against his abdominal wound, felt the hot wetness, knew immediately he was dying. Blood loss, internal damage, maybe 20 minutes if he stayed still, maybe 5 if he moved. He looked at the private, looked at his medical bag, reached for the bandages. His right arm didn't work properly. The shoulder wound had severed something critical, so he used his left hand and his teeth, unwrapped the gauze, packed the private's facial wounds, applied pressure. The private's one remaining eye stared at him, conscious, aware, terrified. "You're fine," Williams said. Blood bubbled from his mouth. Lung damage. The abdominal round had done more damage than he'd thought. "You're going home. Don't give up." He finished the bandaging, injected morphine, started plasma. His vision blurred. He blinked it clear, rechecked the IV flow rate. Good. The private would survive if someone found him in the next hour. Williams tried to stand. Failed. His leg wouldn't support weight. So he crawled, dragging himself and the private toward friendly lines. 6 feet, then 10, then 20. Each movement tore the abdominal wound wider. Each breath filled his lungs with blood. Each heartbeat pushed his life into the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima. He made it 60 feet before he collapsed. The private survived. Williams didn't. Japanese observers documented this incident too. Not officially, not in military reports, but in personal diaries, letters home, after-action memories shared decades later when old men finally spoke of their wars. Lieutenant Hiroshi Nakamura, commanding the machine gun position that killed Williams, wrote in 1987, "I ordered my men to fire on the American medic. He was evacuating wounded. Our doctrine was clear. Target medics, target officers, break their will. My gunner hit him 3 times, good shooting. The medic fell. I expected him to die. Instead, he continued treating the wounded American. He used his own body to shield the patient. He bandaged wounds while his own blood pooled beneath him. I watched through binoculars. I saw everything. When he finally died, my gunner looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us spoke, but we both knew. We had not won. We had killed a man, yes, but we had lost something more important. We had lost the moral certainty that makes soldiers fight." Nakamura surrendered 4 days later. He never fired another shot. The pattern repeated across theaters, across continents. Wherever American medics went, the same impossible courage emerged. Europe, December 1944. Siegfried Line, Private First Class, Frederick C. Murphy, 65th Infantry Division, stepped on a shoe mine while treating wounded soldiers during the assault on Saarleitern. The mine detonated. His left foot disappeared. His right leg shattered below the knee. Shrapnel peppered his torso and face. He didn't scream. He applied a tourniquet to his own leg, then crawled to the next wounded soldier, and the next, and the next. He treated 7 men before blood loss forced him down. He died still holding a bandage. His hand wouldn't release it. The soldier who found him, a lieutenant from New Jersey whose name the records lost, had to pry Murphy's fingers open to take the medical supplies and continue the work. German soldiers advancing after the American retreat found the scene. 7 wounded Americans, bandaged, treated, alive. And 1 dead medic, surrounded by empty plasma bottles and blood-soaked gauze. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt, Wehrmacht, 416th Infantry Division, wrote in his diary, "We found the American medic dead. We also found the men he saved. They surrendered immediately. We did not harm them. How could we? Their medic had died saving them, while our medics stayed safely behind the lines. Who were the civilized ones? Who were the barbarians? These questions haunt me." The psychological impact on enemy forces wasn't theoretical. It was measurable, quantifiable, real. U.S. Army intelligence analyzed interrogation reports from German and Japanese prisoners throughout 1944-1945. A classified document, declassified in 1995, summarized findings. Enemy forces consistently report demoralization when witnessing American medical personnel treating wounded under fire. Captured personnel describe American medics as demonstrating inhuman courage, incomprehensible devotion, and supernatural dedication. Multiple reports indicate enemy soldiers ceased firing or surrendered specifically after observing unarmed American medics evacuating casualties from contested areas. Recommendation: expand combat medic training and visibility. Enemy fear of American medical capabilities may prove as strategically valuable as firepower. The recommendation was implemented: more medics, more training, more visibility, more death, more courage. More impossible acts that broke enemy morale like hammers through glass. Philippines, January 1945, Luzon. Technician, 5th grade, Laverne, Parish. 127th Infantry Regiment carried wounded soldiers through Japanese machine gun fire for 6 hours straight. No breaks, no cover, just Parish, his medical bag, and an apparently suicidal commitment to keeping his brothers alive. He evacuated 19 men. The Japanese bunker suppressing his unit, a reinforced position with interlocking fields of fire and clear sight lines across 200 meters of open ground, stopped firing after the 14th evacuation. Just stopped. The silence confused the American infantry more than the gunfire had. They assumed the Japanese had repositioned or run out of ammunition. Neither was true. The Japanese soldiers were still in the bunker, still armed, still alive. They just couldn't shoot the medic anymore. Sergeant Takashi Ito, Imperial Japanese Army, commanded that bunker. He survived the war, returned to Japan, became a physician. In 1972, he participated in a joint U.S.-Japanese historical conference about the Pacific War. When asked about his combat experiences, he told the story of Parish. "We had orders to kill medics first," Ito said through a translator. "Medics kept their soldiers fighting. Without medics, wounded Americans would die. Dead Americans don't shoot back. So we targeted medics, but this one medic, he just kept coming. We hit him. I know we hit him. I saw the bullets impact, but he kept moving, kept carrying wounded men. After the 14th man, my machine gunner stopped firing. I ordered him to fire. He refused. He said, 'If we kill a man that brave, we deserve to lose the war.' I agreed. We surrendered the next day." Parish was killed by a sniper from a different position 3 hours after Ito's bunker went silent. The bullet hit him in the neck, severed his carotid artery. He bled out in 40 seconds, but he'd already saved 19 lives. The Japanese soldiers from Ito's bunker, 11 men total, surrendered to American forces. They asked specifically to pay respects to the medic they'd failed to kill. The American commander, skeptical but moved, allowed it. The Japanese soldiers bowed to Parish's body. Some wept. One soldier, Private Kenji Watanabe, left a note written in broken English. It was preserved in the regimental archives. "We are sorry we could not kill you. You were too brave to die. You made us remember we were human. Thank you for teaching us war has limits. We will never forget you." Here's the question nobody could answer in 1945. Nobody can fully answer now. Why? Why did American combat medics, trained, equipped, authorized to carry weapons for self-defense, routinely go unarmed into situations that guaranteed death? Why did they prioritize saving lives over preserving their own? Why did they treat enemy wounded with the same care as friendly forces? Why did they embody a code of conduct so absolute, so unyielding, so apparently insane that it shattered enemy morale more effectively than bombs ever could? The Geneva Conventions provided legal protection for medical personnel, but legal protection meant nothing when a machine gun opened fire. The Red Cross armband marked medics as non-combatants, but enemy soldiers who shot medics faced no consequences if nobody survived to report the war crime. So why? The official answer, found in field manuals, training documents, after-action reports, was duty. Medics had a duty to treat the wounded. Duty superseded survival. Duty made cowards into heroes. But that's not the complete answer. Duty alone doesn't make a man throw grenades with one hand and administer plasma with the other. Duty alone doesn't make a man crawl 60 feet through machine gun fire with his intestines falling out to save one more life. Duty alone doesn't make a man work 30 hours straight with shrapnel in his legs because soldiers keep dying on his beach. The real answer is more complex, more human, more impossible to replicate through training. The medics believed, truly, absolutely, fundamentally believed, that every life mattered. American, British, German, Japanese, black, white, rich, poor. Every wounded soldier was somebody's son, somebody's brother, somebody's father, and that somebody deserved to see their boy come home. That belief, that utter, unshakable conviction in human worth, transformed ordinary men into forces of nature. It made them bulletproof, not through armor, but through purpose. It made them unkillable, not through skill, but through necessity. It made them supernatural, not through magic, but through love. And the enemy, hardened by years of war, trained to kill without mercy, conditioned to view opponents as subhuman, couldn't comprehend it, couldn't fight it, couldn't maintain the psychological distance necessary for effective warfare when confronted with men who healed them even while they died. The statistical impact was staggering. American forces during World War II had the lowest combat mortality rate of any major power, not because American soldiers were better fighters, not because American equipment was superior, but because American medics were everywhere. Front lines, behind enemy lines, in the surf, on the beaches, in the jungles, on the mountains. Wherever Americans bled, medics appeared. 97% of wounded American soldiers who received medical treatment survived. 97%. Previous wars, World War I, the Civil War, the Napoleonic Wars, survival rates for battlefield wounded hovered around 30 to 40%. But American medics in World War II achieved survival rates that seemed statistically impossible. They triaged under fire, stabilized the dying, evacuated the critical, all while unarmed, all while exposed, all while violating every survival instinct humans possess. And the enemy watched, and broke, and surrendered. Not always, not immediately, but consistently enough that military strategists had to add medic effectiveness to their calculations of combat power. One American medic was worth approximately 10 additional riflemen in terms of maintaining unit cohesion and combat effectiveness. That's not hyperbole. That's the conclusion of a 1946 Army study analyzing the correlation between medic casualty rates and unit performance. Units with high medic survival rates fought longer, harder, more effectively. Units that lost their medics through death, injury, or capture collapsed faster, surrendered sooner, suffered disproportionate casualties. Soldiers fight harder when they know someone will try to save them. Soldiers break faster when they know death is certain. American medics made death uncertain. And uncertainty is hope. And hope is the most powerful weapon ever deployed. But the cost was extraordinary. 2,254 American combat medics died in World War II. Thousands more were wounded. Thousands more suffered psychological trauma that never healed. They saw things human beings shouldn't see, did things human beings shouldn't have to do, held dying boys and told them lies. You're going home, soldier, and watched them believe and watched them die, and carried that weight forever. Waverly B. Woodson Jr. survived D-Day, survived the war, returned to America, faced segregation despite saving hundreds of white soldiers, was denied the Medal of Honor, nominated 3 times, rejected 3 times, almost certainly because he was black, died in 2005 at age 83, never received the recognition he deserved, never complained, just lived his life, saved who he could. John Harlan Willis died on Iwo Jima, received the Medal of Honor posthumously. His mother accepted it, cried through the ceremony, said only he was always like that, always helping people. Jack Williams died on Iwo Jima, received the Medal of Honor posthumously. His father accepted it, refused to speak at the ceremony, couldn't find words, just held the medal and wept. Frederick C. Murphy died on the Siegfried Line, received the Distinguished Service Cross. His sister accepted it, read his last letter at the ceremony. Tell Mom I'm doing good work. Tell her I'm helping people. Tell her not to worry. Laverne Parrish died on Luzon, received the Silver Star. His wife accepted it, was pregnant with their son, named him Laverne Jr., raised him to be a doctor. Your father saved lives, she told him. You should too. The German and Japanese soldiers who watched American medics work, who aimed at them, who sometimes killed them, who surrendered because of them, carried different wounds, moral wounds, spiritual wounds, wounds that couldn't be bandaged or sutured or treated with morphine. Many became pacifists. Many became physicians. Many became teachers, priests, counselors, professions dedicated to healing the damage war caused. Klaus Dietrich, the machine gunner who didn't shoot Woodson on Omaha Beach, immigrated to America in 1952, became a nurse, worked at a veterans hospital in Maryland for 30 years. When asked why, he said, "I saw what healing looks like. I want to do that instead." Hiroshi Nakamura, who ordered his men to kill Jack Williams, became a physician, specialized in emergency medicine, worked until he was 75. When asked about his motivation, he said, "I killed a healer. I must heal to repay that debt. I will never repay it, but I must try." Takeshi Yamamoto, who threw grenades at John Willis, became a high school teacher, taught history, told his students about Willis every year. "War makes monsters," he'd say, "but some men refuse to become monsters. They heal instead. Those men save the world." 79 years later, the legacy remains. U.S. military combat medics, now called 68W in the Army, corpsmen in the Navy, and Marines, still train under the same philosophy. Treat first, survive second. The wounded come before everything else, including yourself. It's insane. It violates survival instinct. It results in disproportionate medic casualties. It shouldn't work, but it does. American forces maintain the highest battlefield survival rates in the world. Part of that is medical technology. Part of that is evacuation speed. But most of it, the irreplaceable, impossible to quantify part, is the medic running toward gunfire because someone is bleeding. That image, the unarmed healer in the heart of hell, still breaks enemy morale, still inspires soldiers, still reminds humans that even in war, even in chaos, even in the worst thing humans do to each other, some people choose healing over killing. And that choice, that insane, illogical, beautiful choice, might be the only thing that saves us. Omaha Beach is quiet now. Tourists walk the sand, take pictures, read plaques. The bunkers remain. WZ62 is open to visitors. You can stand where Klaus Dietrich stood, look where he looked, see what he saw. The beach below, the ocean beyond, the blood long washed away. But if you stand there long enough, in the early morning when the light hits the water the same way it hit 79 years ago, you can almost see him, Waverly B. Woodson Jr., moving through the surf. Wounded, unarmed, unstoppable, saving lives while machine guns aimed at his back and didn't fire, because even war has limits. Even warriors remember they're human. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, healing proves stronger than death.